Hello and welcome to Unacademy's Let's Crack UPSC CSC English channel. I am Rajshekhar Reddy, faculty for Current Affairs. I'll be taking a series of lectures on important topics for the Civil Services Prelims 2020. Tell something about myself. I am a faculty for Current Affairs and I have 7 years of experience teaching current affairs. I have cleared the Civil Services examination in 2014 and my graduation is in BTech Computers from JNTU Hyderabad. Uh, Before starting today's lecture, I would like to tell you something about the Unacademy's Learning App. Unacademy is India's largest and finest platform for online civil services education. You get a number of advantages by downloading and subscribing to the Unacademy Learning App. You will have classes on a daily basis. You have live tests and quizzes. The courses available on the Unacademy Learning App are structured in nature, and you will have unlimited access to all the content on the Unacademy platform. A number of top educators of our country are teaching on the Unacademy platform. You have Roman Saini, Mudit Gupta, Sudarshan Gurjar, Gunal Patel, Siddharth Arora. A number of prominent personalities are teaching on the Unacademy Learning App. A number of courses are also available. So these courses give you a comprehensive guidance to crack the civil services examination. You need to subscribe the Unacademy Learning App. There are a number of options available. The best option is the 24-month subscription. This option gives you a 67% discount. You will get an additional 10% discount if you use this code RRUPSC. So please use my code to get an additional 10% discount. Let us start with the first lecture in this series. So the topics that will be taken in this lecture are very important for the examination. So these topics include the United Nations Security Council, procedure involved in naming of cyclones, Kalapani dispute, nomination to the Rajya Sabha, Global Hunger Index, Rule of Law Index, and the Human Development Index. So these are the 7 topics which will be covered in today's class. Let us start with the first topic. So the first topic is the United Nations Security Council. This issue is in the news because recently India got elected to the United Nations Security Council. India will be serving in the United Nations Security Council for 2 years, that is 2021 and 2022. India wanted to be part of the United Nations Security Council in the year 2022 because that year is very important for us. We will be celebrating 75 years of independence in 2022. So India will be hosting a series of summits and will be playing an important role at the international stage. We will also host the G20 summit in 2022. So we have attained an important achievement. So we got a seat in the United Nations Security Council for 2 years. So let me read what I have added here. Elections for 5 non-permanent members of the United Nations Security Council were held on June 17th. India won the election for a non-permanent seat from the Asia Pacific category for the term 2021 and 2022. The elections were recently concluded on June 17th, and India won the election from the Asia Pacific category. India's victory was a foregone conclusion because there was no country which competed against India, and that is the reason why India's victory was a foregone conclusion. India's candidature was unanimously endorsed by almost all countries of the group. Every country in the Asia Pacific group has endorsed the candidature of India, including Pakistan and China. India will be serving in the United Nations Security Council for the 8th term in 2021 and 2022. Earlier, we have served 7 times in the United Nations Security Council. The first time we have served in the United Nations Security Council is way back in 1950 and 51. Again, we served in 67, 68, 72, 73, 77, 78, 84, 85, 91, 92. And the last time we served was in the years 2011 and 12. India announced its candidature in the year 2013. So way back in 2013, we have announced our intention to be part of the United Nations Security Council for the years 2021 and 22. Frankly speaking, India would have to wait for some more years to get elected to the United Nations Security Council. Every country will be given an opportunity to serve in the United Nations Security Council. Afghanistan was supposed to enter the United Nations Security Council these 2 years, that is 2021 and 22. India made a request to Afghanistan to withdraw its candidature, and Afghanistan gladly accepted India's request and have withdrawn their candidature, paving the way for India to get elected to the United Nations Security Council. So we must be greatly indebted to the gesture of Afghanistan. So it is because of Afghanistan that we got elected without any competition to the United Nations Security Council. Apart from India, four other countries also got elected to the United Nations Security Council. These countries include Mexico, Kenya, Norway, and Ireland. So the United Nations Security Council comprises of 15 members. We will look at the composition and the functions of the United Nations Security Council. But you need to remember that India, Mexico, Kenya, Norway, and Ireland will be serving for 2 years, starting January 1st, 2021, ending December 31st, 2022. Each year, every year, there will be 5 vacancies in the United Nations Security Council. So, 5 countries will be elected to the United Nations Security Council. So, the elections will be held before the vacancy arises. So, for the vacancies that will arise in 2021 and 2022, elections were held very recently. So, they have been held 6 months in advance. And similarly, every year there will be elections to elect 5 countries to the United Nations Security Council. So each year, the General Assembly elects 5 non-permanent members out of a total of 10 for a 2-year term. The 10 non-permanent members are distributed on regional basis. 3 will be from Africa, 2 are from Asian states, 1 for Eastern European states, 2 for Latin America and Caribbean states, and 2 for Western Europe and other states. This is a very, very important issue. All the members of the United Nations Security Council are divided along regional lines. Apart from the 5 permanent members, the 10 non-permanent members are divided along regional lines. So 3 countries must be from Africa, 2 countries will be from Asia, 1 from Eastern Europe, 2 from Latin America and the Caribbean states, and 2 from Western Europe and others category. In order to get elected to the United Nations Security Council, a country must secure as much as 2/3 of the strength of the United Nations General Assembly. So, in order to get elected to the United Nations Security Council, elections will be held, and a country must get the support of 2/3 of the members of the General Assembly. This is equivalent to 128 members. So, a country must get the support of as many as 128 countries. If a country does not get a support of 128 countries, or if there is a competition between 2 countries, then there will be a next round of elections that will be held. Recently, there was competition among Kenya and Djibouti in the African category, and Kenya got elected in the second round. The United Nations Security Council. So, we have known that India got elected to the United Nations Security Council, and India will be serving for 2 years. India has got elected from the Asia Pacific category without any competition, and India, in fact, got the support of as many as 184 countries. Then, what is this United Nations Security Council? What is the big deal in getting elected to the United Nations Security Council? United Nations Security Council is one of the 6 principal organs of the United Nations. So there are 6 organs of the United Nations, like the United Nations Secretariat, United Nations General Assembly, the United Nations Security Council, ECOSOC, Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, which is now defunct, it is not functioning, and the International Court of Justice. So these are the 6 organs of the United Nations. I'll repeat. So United Nations General Assembly, United Nations Secretariat, United Nations Security Council, ECOSOC, United Nations Trusteeship Council, and the International Court of Justice. So these are the 6 organs of the United Nations, and the most important organ of the United Nations is the United Nations Security Council. It is responsible for maintaining international peace and security. This is the organ which is charged with maintenance of international peace and security. And the resolutions passed by the United Nations Security Council are generally regarded as binding on the member countries. So the resolutions passed by the General Assembly are not binding on the member countries, but the resolutions that are passed by the Security Council, however, are binding. the resolutions must get the support of at least 9 members of out of the 15 members. So a resolution of the United Nations Security Council is said to have been passed if 9 out of the 15 countries vote in favor of that resolution, and there should not be any negative vote from a permanent member. So there are 5 permanent members and there should not be a negative vote from a permanent member. That is how the United Nations Security Council resolutions are passed. So you require the support of 9 members out of the 15 members, and you should not get any negative vote from any permanent members. So if there is a negative vote from a permanent member, it implies that they have vetoed that particular resolution. Under the UN Charter, the functions and powers of the Security Council are as follows. This is very, very important. They can give you these statements in the question paper examination. They can consider the following statements, and they will ask you which of these are functions of the United Nations Security Council. So you need to know the functions of the United Nations Security Council. First and the foremost function of the United Nations Security Council is to maintain international peace and security in accordance with the principles and purposes of the United Nations. So first and the most important function is to maintain international peace and security in accordance with the principles and purposes of the United Nations. Second, to investigate any dispute or situation which might lead to international friction. So they will also look into a situation which can lead into an international friction. To recommend methods of adjusting such disputes or terms of settlement. So they also try to resolve disputes between member states. To formulate plans for the establishment of a system to regulate armaments. This is also important. So they will actually formulate plans to regulate armaments in the world. To determine the existence of a threat to the peace or act of aggression, and to recommend what action should be taken. This is very important. So to determine the existence of a threat to the peace or act of aggression, and to recommend what action should be taken. To call on members to apply economic sanctions and other measures not involving the use of force to prevent or stop aggression. So economic sanctions are also imposed on member countries to stop aggression by the United Nations Security Council. They can also authorize military action. So to take military action against an aggressor. To recommend the admission of new members. This is very important. So it is the approval of the United Nations Security Council that is essential for adding new members to the United Nations. To exercise the trusteeship functions of the United Nations in strategic areas. So they also perform the trusteeship functions. This is a defunct organization, so they are not at present for performing these functions. To recommend to the General Assembly the appointment of Secretary General, and together with the General Assembly elect judges to the International Court of Justice. So these two are also very important functions. So they make recommendations to the General Assembly with respect to the appointment of the Secretary General, and they also participate in the elections to the International Court of Justice along with the General Assembly. So these are the most important functions of the United Nations Security Council. So to maintain international peace and security, to investigate into any dispute and resolve a particular dispute, to formulate plans to regulate armaments, to determine the existence of a threat and to recommend what action should be taken, to call on members to impose economic sanctions, to take military action if necessary, to recommend admission of new members, to exercise the trusteeship functions of the United Nations in strategic areas, to recommend to the General Assembly the appointment of the Secretary General, and together with the General Assembly to elect the judges of the International Court of Justice. So do remember these points. All these points are very, very important for your exam. The Security Council comprises of 15 members. So 5 of them are permanent. So these are P5 countries. So who are these countries? So China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. So these are the 5 countries which were victorious in the Second World War, and they became the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. So China, France, Russia, United Kingdom, and the United States of America. Permanent members, as I've already told you, can veto any substantive resolution, including those on the admission of new members or nominees to the office of the Secretary General. The remaining 10 members are elected on a regional basis, and the presidency of the United Nations Security Council revolves among its members on a monthly basis. So every month we will have a new president to the United Nations Security Council. So this is something which is very important. So all these points are very important. They can give these points as statements in the prelims examination. So you have to make a note of these points. So this is the current composition of the United Nations Security Council. So China, France, Russia, United Kingdom, and the United States are permanent members. But these are the non-permanent members: Belgium, Dominican Republic, Estonia, Germany, Indonesia, Niger, Saint Vincent and Grenadines, South Africa, Tunisia, and Vietnam. So these are the non-permanent members. So they will not be asking questions on the non-permanent members, but anyways, you need to make a note of these countries. India will be replacing Indonesia as a member of the United Nations Security Council, because by December 31st, 2020, their term will be ending. So India will replace Indonesia. So there is a topic which is very, very important for the mains examination also, that is with respect to the reformation of the United Nations Security Council. There are demands made by some countries in the world to reform the United Nations Security Council. India is actively involved in these reform suggestions. India is also involved in a grouping called G4, which includes Brazil, Germany, and Japan, to reform the Security Council. India wants to be a permanent member of the Security Council with veto powers. There are many countries which support India's membership to the United Nations Security Council as a permanent member. But we'll have to wait and see what the opinion is of the permanent members. So China has not given its consent to the membership of India into the United Nations Security Council on a permanent basis. Other countries have expressed their approval for India as a permanent member in the United Nations Security Council. Apart from the expansion and increase in the number of permanent members in the United Nations Security Council, there have been some other demands which are also made. There is a demand to make a country in Africa to be a permanent member. Similarly, there are several other demands which are coming up every now and then. Till date, the United Nations Security Council has been reformed 3 times. This is very, very important for your exam. So 3 times the UNSC has been reformed. What were those 3 occasions? So at the UN's founding in 1945, 5 permanent members of the Security Council were the Republic of China, Provisional Government of the French Republic, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States. So these were the 5 countries. There have been 2 major changes since then. China's seat was originally given to Taiwan. So what we call China today is called People's Republic of China. So the official name of China is the People's Republic of China. China was made a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council only in the year 1971. Before 1971, the Chinese seat was held by the Republic of China, that is also called Taiwan. So many countries believe that the People's Republic of China, that is the present day China, as the real representative of the Chinese people, and they have voted in favor of China being a member of the United Nations Security Council instead of Taiwan. And unfortunately, Taiwan was made to leave the United Nations itself. So Taiwan is not even a member of the United Nations. So Chinese seat was originally held by Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government, the Republic of China. However, the nationalists were forced to retreat to the island of Taiwan in 1949 during the Chinese Civil War. The Chinese Communist Party assumed control of mainland China, thenceforth known as the People's Republic of China. In 1971, so this event happened in 1971. In 1971, General Assembly Resolution 2758 recognized the People's Republic as the rightful representative of China in the United Nations and gave it the seat on the Security Council that had been held by the Republic of China, which was expelled from the United Nations altogether, with no opportunity for membership as a separate nation. So it is unfortunate that Taiwan has been expelled from the United Nations. This is one change which was brought to the United Nations Security Council, and this was brought in 1971. Similarly, Russia's seat was initially held by the Soviet Union. We had the Soviet Union, which collapsed in 1991. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia replaced USSR as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. Most importantly, in 1965, the strength of the Security Council was increased from 11 to 15. So earlier, the number of members in the United Nations Security Council were 11. There were 5 permanent members and 6 non-permanent members. This strength was increased to 15 to accommodate the new countries who have become independent. So as you all know, there were only hardly 50 countries at the end of the Second World War, but now we have more than 190 countries. So with the increase in the number of countries, there were demands to increase the strength of the Security Council, and these demands were accepted in 1965. So they have increased the number of non-permanent members from 6 to 10. So they have increased it from 6 to 10. So thereby they have increased the total strength of the United Nations Security Council from 11 to 15. This is something which is very important. But the United Nations Security Council was created way back in 1945. The world was significantly different in 1945. Today we have several countries like Japan, Germany, India, which are very powerful. India is the third largest economy in the world. India is the second most populous nation in the world. India is the most important country or the most powerful nation in South Asia. So India deserves to be a permanent member in the United Nations Security Council. So there is an urgent need to reform the United Nations Security Council. So in the prelims examination, you will be asked questions on the United Nations Security Council. Usually they'll give you statements and they'll ask you whether these statements are correct or not. But for the mains examination, you will be asked a question on the reformation of the United Nations Security Council and the chances of India getting a membership of the United Nations Security Council as a country with a permanent veto power. So these are the points which you need to know. So this is something about the United Nations Security Council. So we have more or less dealt this comprehensively. So just go through the video again if you have any doubts. So this is the first topic which has been chosen by me. There are high chances of this question being asked in the examination. So let us move on to the second topic. So I have added an image here. What comes to your mind when you see this image? So this is an image which you see very often in the news. So whenever there is a cyclone, either in the Bay of Bengal or in the Arabian Sea, you see the weather report which shows images like this. So there are some cyclones which have been in the news. So for example, Cyclone Umphan has caused a lot of devastation in West Bengal. Cyclone Nisarga has caused a lot of devastation in Maharashtra. What are these names that are given to cyclones? Like, how are these cyclones named? What is the procedure involved in the naming of cyclones? And what is the need for naming cyclones? So there is a specific procedure that is involved in naming of cyclones. So this question can be asked in the examination. I'll give you a sample question when I discuss this topic. So there is a procedure which is involved in naming of cyclones. Now we will be dealing with that procedure. Cyclones is a very important topic that will be dealt separately by geography faculty. But as far as naming is concerned, we will be dealing with the procedure involved in naming of cyclones now. Worldwide, there are 6 regional specialized meteorological centers involved in the naming of cyclones. So there are 6 regional specialized meteorological centers all over the world which are responsible for naming cyclones. Some of these centers also have tropical cyclone warning centers, so which are responsible for issuing cyclone alerts. Indian Meteorological Department is also one of the 6 regional specialized meteorological centers, and the Indian Meteorological Department is responsible for naming cyclones which originate in the Indian Ocean as well as the Indian Ocean, which includes both the Bay of Bengal as well as the Arabian Sea. So Indian Meteorological Department has adopted a procedure. This procedure was adopted in the year 2018, and this procedure involves 13 countries which give a list of 13 names. So there are 13 countries which give 13 names each, and a total of 169 names is maintained by the Indian Meteorological Department. Whenever a cyclone originates in the Bay of Bengal or the Arabian Sea, a name will be taken out from that list and it will be given to that particular cyclone. After the 13 countries have exhausted their first names, then the list will be repeated again. So there will be a chronological order which will be followed by the Indian Meteorological Department while giving names. So IMD follows an alphabetical order while selecting the names given by countries. This procedure is the latest procedure. So 13 countries, each country gives 13 names. A total of 169 names is maintained. But who are these 13 countries? So you have to remember these names, the very important. So Bangladesh, India, Maldives, Myanmar, Oman, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. So Bangladesh, India, Maldives, Myanmar, Oman, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. So they were involved in the naming of cyclones earlier also. So in 2004, only 8 countries were involved in the naming of cyclones. Each country used to give 8 names. So a total of 64 names were maintained by IMD. The last name in that list was Cyclone Umphan. Cyclone Umphan is the last name in the previous list. And Cyclone Umphan was given, the name was given by Thailand. This list got exhausted very recently, and we have now a fresh list. For the fresh list, 5 more countries started participating. So what are these 5 countries? So you just go through the file again. So these 5 countries are Iran, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Yemen. So Bangladesh, India, Maldives, Myanmar, Oman, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. Iran, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Yemen. So these are the 13 countries involved in the naming of cyclones. You need to remember that the name cyclone Nisarga was given by Bangladesh. So B is the first alphabet among these 13 countries. And you also must remember that this list is already given. So in the future, you can know the country which has named a particular cyclone very easily. So I have added the list here. So this is the complete list of 169 names. So let us see here. See this list. So column 1, this is the name. So cyclone Nisarga. So Bangladesh has given this name. So Bangladesh will be followed by India. So the next cyclone which originates in the Bay of Bengal or the Arabian Sea will be named Gati. Then we have the name given by Iran, which is Nivar. So we have the list of 13 names in column 1. After column 1 gets exhausted, we will go to column 2. Again, Bangladesh will be giving its name. Then we have the Indian name. So this procedure is carried out several times. So you must remember the names given by India. You can be asked a question. So Gati, Tej, Murasu, Ag, Vyom, Jar, Prabaho, Neer, Prabhanjan, Gurni, Ambud, Jaladi, Vega. So these are the names given by India. So let us repeat these names. So Gati, Tej, Murasu, Ag, Vyom, Char, Prabaho, Neer, Prabhanjan, Gurni, Ambud, Jaladi, Vega. So these are the 13 names. As you all know, so Cyclone Nisarga, which has caused devastation along the coast of Maharashtra, is the name given by Bangladesh. You can notice that Bhutan is not involved in the naming of cyclones. Similarly, Nepal or Afghanistan are also not involved. So you can be asked this question: consider the following nations. Which of these nations are involved in the naming of cyclones that originate in the Indian Ocean? So you must be prepared to answer this carefully. So this is about naming of cyclones, a very important topic for the prelims as well as the mains examination. You just go through this file will be sufficient. Then we will look at a dispute that is in the news. So Kalapani dispute. Kalapani dispute is something that is studied as part of international relations. So this is a dispute which has increased tensions between India and Nepal. So the gap between India and Nepal was further widened because of the Kalapani dispute. But what is this Kalapani dispute, and why is this dispute in the news? So why are we bothered about the Kalapani dispute? So this is an unfortunate event which disturbed the relationship between India and Nepal in the recent period. So let us see the origin of the current dispute. So in November 2019, India released fresh maps of the then newly created union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, along with a map of India depicting union territories. So as you all know, the special status which was enjoyed by uh, the state of Jammu and Kashmir was annulled in August 2019. Following the annulment, the state was converted into two union territories. These union territories were Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. So, following the annulment of the special status of Jammu and Kashmir, we felt the need to release new political maps of India. So, the new political maps of India were released. In these maps, Pakistan occupied Kashmir was shown as part of Jammu and Kashmir, and Gilgit Baltistan, which is also controlled by Pakistan, is shown as part of Ladakh. So POK is shown as part of Jammu and Kashmir, and Gilgit Baltistan is shown as part of Ladakh. These maps created a new problem for India. So the Nepali government, after having a look at these maps, lodged a protest against India against the inclusion of an area called Kalapani in India. So the Nepali government or the Nepal government lodged a protest against the inclusion that Kalapani area in India's far west, claiming it as Nepalese territory. So they claim that Kalapani is Nepalese territory and India has illegally added it as part of the Indian territory. Kalapani, they claim, is part of the Dachula district of Nepal, whereas India has included it as part of the Pithoragarh district of Uttarakhand. So Kalapani is an area that is located in the northeastern part of Uttarakhand, and this is a very important area strategically also, and it also has a significant importance as far as pilgrimage to Kailas Manasarovar Yatra is concerned. The Ministry of External Affairs issued a clarification when Nepal has lodged a protest. So MEA has stated that our map accurately depicts the Indian territory. The fresh map has not revised our boundaries with Nepal. The boundary delineation exercise with Nepal is an ongoing mechanism, is ongoing under the existing mechanism. We reiterate our commitment to finding a solution through dialogue in the spirit of our close and friendly bilateral relations. So, India has given clarification on the protest lodged by Nepal. India has said that our map, that is the map released by India, is very accurate and we have not revised our boundaries with Nepal. This is where Kalapani is located. It is located in the northeastern corner of Uttarakhand, and this is the reason, this is the place that is disputed. But what is this Kalapani and what is the origin of this dispute? So Kalapani area is a 35 square kilometer area. So the total area is approximately 35 square kilometers, and this area is claimed by both India and Nepal. River Mahakali, which is also known as River Kali, flows through the Kalapani region, which is situated on the eastern bank of this river. So it is situated on the eastern bank of this particular river, according to Nepal. Both India and Nepal claim Kalapani as integral part of their territories. India, as I've told you, is as part of Pithoragarh district, and Nepal as part of the Dachula district. Kalapani is strategically very important because, as you can see, it is located very near to the tri-junction of India, Nepal, and China. So it is located very near to the Lipu Lake Pass, which is the tri-junction between India, Nepal, and China. It is located very close to a trade route between India and China, and it is also a route through which the Kailas Manasarovar Yatra takes place. And this route is very convenient for India because most of the journey takes place in our country. We have two other routes. One is through the Nathula Pass and the other is through Kathmandu. But those routes actually take pilgrims, and for a major part of their journey they will be in other countries. But in this case, a major part of the journey takes place in the Indian territory. So that is the reason why this is a very important area strategically. So what is the dispute? When did this dispute arise? So this dispute can be traced to an agreement which was signed between India and the British in 1816. So following the Anglo-Nepalese War, India signed, that is British signed the Treaty of Sagoli with Nepal. So 1816 Treaty of Sagoli was signed following the defeat of Nepal, and this treaty defined Mahakali as the western border of Nepal. So western border of Nepal with India is defined by the Mahakali river. River Mahakali, however, has many tributaries. All of these tributaries merge at Kalapani. So these tributaries come and merge at Kalapani. As you all know, a river is formed by several tributaries. Like Ganga is formed by Alaknanda and Bhagirath. So Ilaga, that is how the Mahakali river has become disputed. So India claims that Kalapani is the place where Mahakali originates. So Mahakali is located to the east of this particular region, that is Kalapani region, and India says so. Mahakali river originates at Kalapani. Since Kalapani is located to the west of this river, so Kalapani area must belong to India. So I'll just repeat what I have said. India says that Mahakali river originates in the Kalapani region. And India says since it originates in the Kalapani region, this area must belong to them because this region is located to the west of this river, that is Mahakali. But Nepal has a different version. Nepal says that river Mahakali originates under a different name and it originates in Lipu Lake. So it originates near Lipu Lake and it originates in the name of Lipugad. So Nepal says Mahakali does not originate in Kalapani. It originates near Lipu Lake and it originates in the name Lipugad and it is joined by several rivers at Kalapani. So Kalapani is not the place of origin of river Mahakali according to Nepal. They say Lipugad is the river. It originates near the Lipu Lake Pass, and all areas to the east of Lipugad form part of Nepal, and that is how Kalapani must also be part of Nepal. So that is the reason why this dispute arises. So the dispute is because of the differences in perception as to the origin of the Mahakali river. India says Mahakali river originates in Kalapani, whereas Nepal says Mahakali originates in a different name, that is Lipugad, in near the Lipu Lake Pass. So Lipugad is one of the major tributaries that merges into the main river Kalapani. The Nepalese contention is that Lipugad is in fact the Kali river up to its source to the east of the Lipu Lake Pass. So Lipugad is the Kali river according to Nepal. The Indian side contends that river Mahakali begins where Lipugad meets Kalapani springs. So India says Mahakali originates when Lipugad meets Kalapani, whereas Nepal says Mahakali originates near the Lipu Lake Pass. That is how the dispute arises. Recently, the government of Nepal or the Nepalese parliament has enacted the second Constitutional Amendment Act to add Kalapani, not just Kalapani, they have also added Limpiyadura and Lipu Lake, which are also located in the nearby areas as part of the territory of Nepal. So this has further widened the gap between India and Nepal. So this is a point which you need to take a note of. Then we have the other topic which is also important for your exam. I think you might have identified the person in this image. This person is Ranjan Gogoi. He till recently served as the Chief Justice of India. He was the Chief Justice of India before S.A. Bobde, and his tenure is very controversial. Sexual harassment allegations were made against this person. At the same time, opposition parties have criticized several judgments delivered by the Supreme Court during his tenure as the Chief Justice of India. But today we will not discuss those issues. We will be discussing an important development that has taken place with respect to Ranjan Gogoi after his retirement. So what is this development? So he was nominated to the Rajya Sabha. So Ranjan Gogoi was nominated to the Rajya Sabha, and this actually created a big controversy because he was nominated to the Rajya Sabha within 4 months after his retirement. So within 4 months after his retirement, he was nominated to the Rajya Sabha, and many opposition parties have criticized this decision of the government of India. Let us see how persons can get nominated to the Rajya Sabha, and what is the article in the constitution which deals with the nomination facility, and what are the various issues that surround this particular issue. Former Chief Justice of India, Ranjan Gogoi, was recently nominated to the Rajya Sabha by the President of India. Article 80 of the Constitution of India allows the President of India to nominate 12 persons to the Rajya Sabha belonging to arts, science, social service, and literature. This is a very important point which you need to know. The facility of nomination is available to the Rajya Sabha, and the President nominates members to the Rajya Sabha under Article 80. 12 members are nominated to the Rajya Sabha. So the strength of the Rajya Sabha at present is 245. 233 members are elected, 12 members are nominated. These 12 members must belong to these four categories: arts, science, social service, and literature. So this is very important. However, there have been several nominations in the past of persons who do not belong to these categories. The most famous case is the case of Sachin Tendulkar. Sachin Tendulkar was nominated to the Rajya Sabha by the UPA government in 2012. He retired as a member of the Rajya Sabha, but when he was nominated to the Rajya Sabha, a PIL was filed in the Delhi High Court, and this PIL challenged the nomination of Sachin Tendulkar to the Rajya Sabha. The PIL was simple. So Sachin Tendulkar does not fit in any of these four categories. So the constitution says that arts, science, social service, and literature must be the categories in which a person must get nominated. But Sachin Tendulkar is a sports person. He does not fit in any of these categories. In that case, this Delhi High Court has stated that this list is just indicative in nature. So this is not exhaustive in nature. This is just indicative in nature. So they are just indications, but they do not restrict the power of the president to nominate a person who has made significant contributions in any other field. So this is just indicative in nature, and it is not exhaustive in nature. Any person who has made significant contributions in any field can be nominated to the Rajya Sabha. When you check at the numbers who are serving as nominated members, you can have a good idea. So there are a number of persons who do not belong to these four categories but have been nominated to the Rajya Sabha. Setting that controversy aside, because Ranjan Gogoi also does not fit in any of these following categories, setting that controversy aside, should persons who have served as judges of the Supreme Court or the High Court be nominated to the Rajya Sabha? That is a major question which needs to be asked here. So there is a debate which is going on in our country whether to appoint judges as members of the parliament or as members of the executive. This controversy, however, is not new. This controversy dates back to the 1950s itself, and there are a number of persons or experts who support the nomination of judges to the parliament as well as members of the executive. But there are several others who oppose such nominations. Let's see. This debate whether a judge or the Chief Justice of India should be allowed to become a member of the parliament began way back in 1952 when Justice Fazal Ali was appointed the governor of Odisha after he completed his tenure as the judge of the Supreme Court. Justice Fazal Ali, you must have heard about this person. So he was part of the SRC, if I am not wrong. So he was a judge of the Supreme Court, and he was appointed as the governor of Odisha after serving as the judge of the Supreme Court. And interestingly, his appointment was made before he retired as the judge of the Supreme Court. So he retired as judge of the Supreme Court on 30th June, but he was appointed on the 7th of June itself. So he took office after retiring as the judge of the Supreme Court as the governor of Orissa. There is one more interesting case. This person is very, very interesting. Justice Baharul Islam. So Baharul Islam was an advocate elected to the Rajya Sabha as a member of the Congress in 1962. So he was an advocate. He was elected to the Rajya Sabha as a member of the Congress. He resigned as a member of the Congress in 1972, only to be appointed as a judge of the Guwahati High Court. So he was an advocate. He was elected to the Rajya Sabha. He resigned as a member of the Rajya Sabha, and after his resignation, he was made a judge of the Guwahati High Court. After serving as a judge of the High Court, he was made a judge of the Supreme Court. So subsequently, he was made as a judge of the Supreme Court. Not only was such an appointment unprecedented owing to his political inclinations, Justice Islam, during his tenure in the Supreme Court, delivered a judgment absolving the Bihar Chief Minister, the then Bihar Chief Minister from the Congress, in the Urban Cooperative Bank case. So there was a corruption case filed against the then Chief Minister of Bihar, and he was absolved by Barul Islam when he was serving as the judge of the Supreme Court. So this was very, very controversial during those times. What followed was even more abrasive. He resigned from the Supreme Court and he contested elections again as a Congress candidate, and he was elected to the Rajya Sabha once again. So he started his career as an advocate. He became a member of the Rajya Sabha. He became a member of the Guwahati High Court. After that, he became a member of the Supreme Court. After that, he resigned. Again, he became a member of the Rajya Sabha. So it has come full circle for him. Then we have the former Chief Justice of India, Ranganath Mishra, who retired as the Chief Justice of India in 1991, but he was elected to the Rajya Sabha on a Congress ticket. And this person is also controversial because he gave a clean sheet to the Congress in the 1984 anti-Sikh riots. So there have been several controversial appointments in the past, but not all appointments that are made are controversial. There are several judges who have made significant contributions in their post retirement assignments. You can take the example of MC Chagla. I have given you the description here. Barring a few examples of impropriety, India has also seen some excellent contributions made by judges post their retirement in public offices. The first example is that of Justice MC Chagla, who served as the first Chief Justice of the Bombay High Court. Justice Chagla, immediately after his retirement, served as India's ambassador to the United States, following which he served as the Indian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, and on his retirement from his diplomatic assignments, became a member of the Union Cabinet. So he served as the ambassador to the US, he has served as High Commissioner to the UK, he also became a member of the Union Cabinet. However, Justice MC Chagla's independent mind once again stood out when he took a stand against emergency imposed by the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. So he was opposed to the emergency imposed by Indira Gandhi in 1975. The nomination of Chief Justice of India, that is the former Chief Justice of India, must be seen in this context. So this is nothing new, and such instances have occurred in the past. But in this case, the opposition parties have criticized this nomination as a sort of a quid pro quo arrangement. So they say that this is a reward given to Ranjan Gogoi for several judgments which have been delivered during his tenure as the Chief Justice of India. So many judgments which have been delivered during his tenure were in favor of the government. So they were similar to the stand that has been taken by the government of India, and that is the reason why such allegations are being made. However, you need to know that Ranjan Gogoi is not the only judge who has delivered these judgments. There are a number of other judges who have also been part of these judgments. So you cannot accuse all the other judges for being involved in such quid pro quo transactions. Then the post-retirement benefits of judiciary must be discussed. Whether the judges must be given assignments after their retirement. So there are many people who argue that judges should not be given any assignments after their retirement. There should be a compulsory cooling off period of at least 2 years. So they should not be given any assignments for at least 2 years. After 2 years, they can be allowed to do anything. Even the government can appoint them for various new assignments. Post-retirement benefits of the judiciary, however, are not new. They have been in existence over the past several decades now. So there are judges who get appointed immediately after serving as judge of the Supreme Court. They get appointed to various organizations, and their appointments will also take various forms and shapes. For example, you take the NHRC, National Human Rights Commission. NHRC is always headed by a person who has served as a judge of the Supreme Court. Till recently, it was a former Chief Justice of India, but they have made an amendment. Similarly, the National Green Tribunal must also be headed by a judge of the Supreme Court, a person who has served as a judge of the Supreme Court. There are a number of tribunals for which judges are appointed. They also take a number of lucrative arbitration assignments. They can also be appointed as directors of public sector undertakings. So post-retirement benefits come in various forms. So getting appointed as the governor of a state or becoming a minister in the cabinet or becoming a member of the parliament are not the only forms in which post retirement benefits come to an individual who has served as the judge of the Supreme Court or a High Court. So they come in different forms. So there should be a policy with respect to post retirement benefits, because many people say that the judgments of this Supreme Court or the judges may get swayed away by the post retirement benefits. So they may be promised an important post retirement benefit, and this may affect the independence of the judiciary. So it is better that there is a cooling off period for judges. Even I am of the personal opinion that there should be a compulsory cooling off period for judges. Interestingly, there is a case of sexual harassment against Mr. Ranjan Gogoi. Allegations were made against him by a female staffer. She was dismissed from service. Again, she was taken back to the service. There was a huge controversy with respect to that case of sexual harassment. The procedure which was adopted by the Supreme Court in dealing with that sexual harassment case was also very, very controversial. So we will not be going into the merits of this issue, but in the examination you will be asked statements. What is meant by nomination? Who are the people who are eligible for nomination? In what categories can people be nominated? And should members of the judiciary or should retired members of the judiciary be appointed to the legislature or the executive? So this is something which you need to know. Then we will move on to the next topic. So the next topic is Global Hunger Index. So what is this Global Hunger Index, and what is the significance of this index? Indexes are very important for your examination. I have added 3 indexes for today's class. They are commonly asked in the civil services prelims examination. You can also take reference to indexes in your mains exam. So for preparing this topic, you need to see a particular format. So index, publishing organization, parameters, India's rank, best ranking country, and other relevant issues. So you just have to follow this pattern: index, publishing organization, parameters, India's rank, best ranking country, and other relevant issues. So we will follow the same pattern here. Let us see the Global Hunger Index. Global Hunger Index is an index that is released by 2 organizations. It is released annually by 2 organizations. What are these organizations? One organization is called Concern Worldwide, and the other organization is a German organization, Welthungerhilfe. So it is prepared jointly by an Irish aid agency, Concern Worldwide, and a German organization, Welthungerhilfe, and it is published annually. So this is an index which is released annually. What is this index? What is the purpose of this index? So this is basically a statistical measure which tracks the level of hunger in various countries of the world. So what is the level of hunger in different countries of the world is measured by the Global Hunger Index. The Global Hunger Index is a tool designed to comprehensively measure and track hunger at global, regional, and national levels. So it tracks hunger at global, regional, and national levels. GHI scores, that is the Global Hunger Index scores, are calculated each year to assess progress and setbacks in combating hunger. So how does the world combat hunger, and what is the progress made in dealing with hunger is measured using the Global Hunger Index. The GHI is designed to raise awareness and understanding of the struggle against hunger, provide a way to compare levels of hunger between countries and regions, and call attention to those areas of the world where hunger levels are the highest and where the need for additional efforts to eliminate hunger is greatest. So it highlights the areas where the levels of hunger are very high, and also brings to the notice of the important countries about the need to eliminate hunger in several countries of the world. So it is an index, very, very important index, which highlights and tracks the level of hunger in different countries of the world. How do you define hunger? So hunger is usually understood to refer the distress associated with the lack of sufficient calories. So if you don't get enough calories per day, then you can say that the individual is suffering from hunger. You have the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, which defines food deprivation or undernourishment as the consumption of too few calories to provide the minimum amount of dietary energy that each individual requires to live a healthy and productive life given that person's sex, age, stature, and physical activity level. So you can just check the definition of hunger. So for your understanding, I have added the definition of hunger and undernutrition. So hunger basically refers to a situation where an individual does not have sufficient number of calories per day. Similarly, undernutrition goes beyond calories and also includes essential vitamins and minerals, and also the essential proteins that are required to lead a healthy and happy life. So hunger means if there is insignificant or insufficient number of calories, then you say that the person is suffering from hunger. Whereas undernutrition involves not just hunger but also deprivation of essential minerals and vitamins and nutrients. I just have added definitions of hunger and undernutrition, just go through them. The GHI, that is the Global Hunger Index, is formulated using 4 parameters. So I have told you this is the way you need to study. So you need to know the index, you need to know the publishing organization. In this case, this is jointly published by Concern Worldwide and Welthungerhilfe. What are the parameters involved in this index? So there are 4 parameters which are involved in this index. So it is a statistical measure, so it involves several steps. There are 3 steps involved in calculating the global hunger index. So what are these 4 parameters? Undernourishment, I have already given the definition of undernourishment. So the share of population that is undernourished, that is whose calorie intake is insufficient and they don't get essential vitamins and minerals. Child wasting, so the share of children under the age of 5 who are wasted, that is who have low weight for their height. So wasting is defined as wasting or wasting is defined as low weight for their particular height, so reflecting acute undernutrition. Then we have child stunting, which is reflected in the form of low height to age, and child mortality, which is reflected in under the age of 5 mortalities, the mortality rate of children under the age of 5. So you will be asked questions on the parameters used for formulating the global hunger index. So there are 4 parameters that are used for formulating the global hunger index: undernourishment, child wasting, child stunting, and child mortality. So very important, you need to remember these 4 indexes, 4 parameters. Then there will be a GHI scale. So there is a scale which reads from 0 to 100, and countries will be placed from 0 to 100, and this scale is calculated, as I've told you, on the basis of 4 parameters. So what are the parameters? I have already told you. So undernourishment is 1 parameter, under 5 mortality rate is 1 more parameter, wasting and stunting. So wasting and stunting form part of child undernutrition, child mortality, and inadequate food supply. So I have added how actually the GHI scale is calculated. So this is not that important for you, but for your understanding, I have added some additional information. You can go through this file now. So you just go through this video once again so that you will have a clear cut understanding. So this is the severity scale. So you say that there is low level of hunger if the value of the country is less than or equal to 9.9. So if you say that moderate hunger is prevalent in a country if the severity scale measures somewhere between 10 and 19.9. Very important, these points. Then GHI severity scale, if you say that the serious level of hunger is serious if the values are between 20 and 34.9. Alarming when the values are between 35 and 49.9, and extremely alarming if the values are more than 50 or equivalent or more than 50. This is very important. So this is the world map. So you don't need any hunger measurement for the European countries and the Northern American countries because they are already developed. So levels of hunger are extremely low or they are insignificant. But you have hunger prevalent mostly in South Asian countries and well African countries. So you can see from the map here that low levels of hunger are prevalent in South America, but mostly it is the South Asian countries and the African countries that suffer from hunger all over the world. So we need to focus on this problem. We need to eliminate hunger from our country. So what is India's rank? This is very important for your exam. They will ask you a question on India's rank. So India's rank in this index is 102. So India is ranked 102 out of 117 countries. And unfortunately, India is behind neighboring countries like Nepal, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So we are behind Nepal, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. The country is placed in this category, that is serious category, which means the value is between 20 and 34.9. So India's score is 30.3. You can be asked which country suffers from the highest levels of hunger in the world. So the answer for that question is Central African Republic. Central African Republic, with a score of some 53, is having an extremely alarming situation. So you can see here there is only one country in the world which is having a red mark. So the level of hunger is more than 50%. So this is very unfortunate, and you need to take steps to eradicate hunger from the world. So this is the hunger report. So you will be asked only questions in the prelims examination, but you can take reference to these questions, this index in the mains also. When you write a general essay on human development in our country, you can also take a reference to hunger. So index here is the Global Hunger Index Publishing Organization. It is jointly published by Concern Worldwide and Welt Hunger Hilfe. There are 4 parameters: undernourishment, fasting, stunting, and under 5 mortality rate. India's rank is 102 out of 117, and the best ranking country is in this case there is no best ranking country, that is the worst ranking country. The worst ranking country in this index is Central African Republic. So this is what you need to know. So India is ranked 102. Then we have the Rule of Law Index. Same procedure is adopted here also. Who publishes this index? What are the parameters used in calculating this index? What is India's rank, and which country ranks first? So Rule of Law Index is an index that is published by the World Justice Report. So it is an index published by the World Justice Report, and it is the world's leading source for original independent data on the rule of law. So how is rule of law experienced and perceived around the world is measured using the Rule of Law Index. So this is a very simple point which you need to remember. How is rule of law measured and perceived in the world is tracked by the Rule of Law Index. So effective rule of law helps reducing in corruption, combats poverty and disease, and protects people from injustices large and small. It is the foundation for communities of justice, opportunity, and peace, underpinning development, accountable government, and respect for fundamental rights. So rule of law gives you a number of advantages. It eliminates corruption, combats poverty and disease, etc. So what are the parameters? So there are 8 parameters involved in formulating the Rule of Law Index. So Rule of Law is released by World Justice Project. World Justice Project is the organization which releases the Rule of Law Index. So it basically measures how the rule of law is experienced and perceived around the world. So strengthening rule of law helps combat corruption, eliminate disease and poverty from a country. So there are 8 parameters to measure rule of law index. So constraints on government power, absence of corruption, open government, fundamental rights, order and security, regulatory enforcement, civil justice, criminal justice. So you just have to remember this. They can ask you questions on parameters also. Last year in the prelims examination, they asked you questions on parameters used for formulating the ease of doing business index, which is a very popular index. So similarly, they can ask parameters with respect to the rule of law index also. So constraints on government power, absence of corruption, open government, fundamental rights, order and security, regulatory enforcement, civil justice, and criminal justice. So these are the 8 parameters. So which country ranks first? So the country which ranks first in this index is Denmark. So very important, you just need to remember this. Denmark ranks first in this index. So it has the highest standards of rule of law. Then what is India's rank? So India's rank is 69 out of 128 countries. So India's rank is 69. Our score is 0.51. So you just have to remember this. So Denmark, Norway, and Finland topped the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index rankings in 2020. Worst ranking countries are Democratic Republic of Congo, Cambodia, and Venezuela. India is ranked 69. So India's rank is 69. Best ranking country is Denmark. This is what you need to know. In fact, this question was asked in the prelims 2018. So what is this question? So this question is, rule of law index is released by which of the following? A very simple question, but it was a tough question at that time because many people don't know about this index. So the rule of law index is released by, very simple question. It is released by the World Justice Project. Then we will come to the final topic of this lecture. So that is the Human Development Index. Human Development Index is perhaps the most popular of all the indexes. You can take reference to the Human Development Index while you are writing your mains answers, your general essay. So same format will be adopted. So index, publishing organization, parameters, best ranking country, and India's rank. So I'll just read what I have told you. So the Human Development Index is an index released by the United Nations Development Program. UNDP is the organization which releases the Human Development Index. It measures human development. So development is measured in a different way by the Human Development Index. So the Human Development Index was created to emphasize that people and their capabilities should be the ultimate criteria for assessing the development of a country, not economic growth alone. So before 1990, many countries equated economic growth with development. So the higher the growth that you register, the more the development that a country has. So, but by 1990s, many countries realized that economic growth does not just alone promote development. So there should be much more than economic growth which is needed, and that is measured in terms of the Human Development Index. So before 1990, a country's level of development was measured solely by its economic growth. By taking non-economic dimensions of human well-being into account, the Human Development Index has revolutionized the idea of what was meant by countries becoming more developed. How do you say that a country is more developed? It is not just economic growth that should be taken as the criteria. There are some non-economic dimensions of human well-being that must be taken to classify a country as developed. So, what are these non-economic dimensions which will be used to formulate the Human Development Index? So, the Human Development Index is based on three parameters. So, what are those parameters? So, the Human Development Index released by UNDP is a summary measure of the average achievement in key dimensions of human development. They are a long and healthy life, being knowledgeable, and having a decent standard of living. The Human Development Index is a geometric mean of the normalized indexes for each of the three dimensions. So it is based on three dimensions: literacy or education, life expectancy, and the standard of living. So what is India's rank in this index? So India's rank in this index is 129. So India more or less has been in the same position. We may see some improvement again. We come back to the same position again. So the best ranking countries are Norway, Switzerland, Ireland, Germany, and Hong Kong. So these are the five countries that are best ranking. Then we have our neighborhood countries, that is Sri Lanka, India, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. I have mentioned the ranks of these countries. So this is very important for your exam. So you need to know the best ranking country, Norway. India's rank is 129, and the neighborhood countries rankings are here mentioned. Sri Lanka is the best performing country in South Asia. There is, however, a lot of criticism against the Human Development Index. It is criticized for not taking into consideration some factors like inequality, poverty, and gender disparity. So it does not take into consideration these factors while measuring development. So it does not take the level of peace also in a particular country, inequality, poverty, etc. Then there is one more point which you need to remember. This index does not take into consideration the inequalities that are prevalent within a country. So there are vast disparities that are prevalent within a country, and this index does not take into consideration while formulating the index. For example, there exists a wide divergence within countries in terms of development, and Human Development Index does not capture this. For example, there exists a significant difference in equalities. There exist significant inequalities between North and South India, and HDI fails to capture these inequalities. So that is what you need to remember. So this is the class here. I have added three indexes, and I have also added several other topics which are very important for this year's prelims examination. So there are a number of indexes which we will cover in the future classes, but you need to know that this topic is an often asked question in the examination. So please like, comment, and subscribe. If you like the video, please share the video. Thank you for watching this video. We have another channel of Unacademy, that is UPSC CSE English in 10. Please subscribe to that channel. In that channel, informative videos are presented in the form of short videos. So you have content on various topics in not more than 10 minutes. So very useful. Please call me at this number 767-3939-090 for clarification of your doubts. Please use my code RRUPSC when you subscribe to Unacademy Learning app. So this is it. Have a good day. Thank you so much.